Hey YouTube, CDog2233 here, and today I'm going to kind of take a turn off the usual content on my channel and give you a flawless study guide for the CPA exam. Now, most of my subscribers do probably not know this, but I recently passed my CPA. I went completely flawless on all 4 exams, and I'm a pretty active member on the North American State Board of Accountancy's test examiner form or whatever, where a lot of candidates post questions about study strategies and how to pass the exam, etc. I decided just to go ahead and make a YouTube video about my study strategy. With my study strategy, I did go 4 for 4. So the first thing I would recommend, there's a lot of ways to approach the CPA exam, which is why so many people ask for advice from people that have passed it. But I'd say probably the most common question I get from someone who is just starting to look into taking it is, what order should I take it in? And my answer is not what most people say. It actually seems to be kind of an outlier route. But I think my route is very good, and I'll explain why. So, as you can see on screen, this is my order that I recommend doing: BEC, Reg, FAR, and Audit. Now, on BEC was my first exam. I got a 79. First time I'd ever taken a CPA exam. On Reg, I got an 85. On FAR, I got an 86. And on Odd, I got a 90. So as you can see, throughout the course of my CPA exam, I got gradually better with my testing strategy. And what I'm about to show you today is my completely refined study strategy that I used primarily on FAR and Audit, which I got just massive scores on. So the reasoning behind this order for the CPA, a lot of people suggest taking BEC last. Now, I strongly disagree with that. On your first exam, there's so many other variables that you're not prepared for when you're in the testing environment, and you're so nervous, it's completely new to you. So I think it's honestly best to take the easiest exam first, just because the overall experience is stressful. You go in not knowing what to expect, not knowing what the test environment is exactly going to be like. So I think having the easiest test in a situation like that is going to prevent you from having to fail an exam and retake it. Another reason to take BEC first is, in the event that you have an exam expire on you, which I know countless people that have had an exam expire on them, which exam would you rather retake? BEC, that should have been easy for you to pass to begin with, or the gauntlet known as FAR that I hear a lot of people recommend you take first? I wouldn't take FAR just because if I ever had a FAR exam expire on me, I'd be done. I absolutely despised the FAR exam. It was horrible to study for. It is some of the most dry material out there, and it's stuff I do at work every day now, but it's pretty dry material. So, building on from that, next I recommend Reg. In my opinion, Reg is the second hardest exam. So basically what you're going for with this is a gradual progression in difficulty. I would rate Reg the second hardest exam. It's got 8 units in Becker, so it's got a little bit more testable content than Audit and BEC, but a little less than FAR. That's my main reasoning for that, is again, if you pass BEC, you'll have a lot of momentum, and it's a lot of good momentum going into a slightly more difficult exam. If you guys want me to make specific study strategies for each exam, I'll do that, but I need enough positive feedback and people asking for it for me to do it. So And with those, I do have to be very careful not to give away any information that's on the actual exam because that is highly frowned upon. So moving on, FAR is the gauntlet. It is the hardest exam. It is the most time-consuming one to study for. It is not a pleasant task to study for FAR. But given that it's your third exam, hopefully you have a refined study strategy by the time you hit FAR. You know what works for you. You know what doesn't work. So by the time you hit FAR, you're studying efficiently. You're not wasting time on stuff that's not going to help you. And that's why I recommend saving FAR for third. And then why audit last? In my opinion, audit is the second easiest exam. It's a little harder than BEC in my honest opinion. I know a lot of people say they struggle with it. It's just really not that complicated. If you really struggle with audit, go get a 2-month internship being an audit intern at a firm. If you've done any sort of audit work, it is so easy. So the reasoning for that is if you're running out of time before one expires, it's good to have an easy one last still. So I am kind of playing on that still, that you want an easier one for last. That being said, I think the second easiest one is a better one to do last. Your study strategy should be so refined, you should be able to knock out the 6 chapters in record time with audit. So given those explanations, if you want to leave comments and ask for more explanation on why I put one where, go ahead. But we're going to move on to general study strategy. For my study strategy, first off, if you are in college and you are looking to do the CPA, start studying your last semester. It will get you so far ahead of the curve, and you will have, once you start working in the real world 40 hours a week, it is so hard to study. So I recommend study as early as you can possibly get registered with your state board. Even before that, you can start studying without being registered. You just can't test until you're registered. So I started studying for BEC January of my senior spring. I graduated in May. I started studying in January. You are allowed to test before you graduate. I had already passed BEC by the time I graduated, and 2 weeks after I graduated, I took reg. So within a month of graduating, I had 2 CPA exams passed already. This put me very far ahead of the curve when it came to looking for a job, competing with other interns, you name it, you are ahead of the curve if you can graduate college with 2 CPA exams passed already. So when you take them, I recommend taking just an open attempt, first attempt at a test at the end of the testing window. That gives you ample time to study. I do recommend you schedule your exam very far out. Study it. I say study it when you schedule it when you start studying for it. Later in this lecture, I'll give you a kind of a timeline of where you should be. It's kind of ignoring Becker. I didn't do any of the Becker little schedule planners or anything like that. I created my own study strategy that worked very well. So take the test at the end of the testing window. Now, I took my tests in 2018, which if anyone who tested in 2018 is still working, you will know that the testing windows and the scoring windows were horrible in 2018. You had to wait almost 2 months to get your score back. It was absolutely ridiculous. I don't know. I never got a good excuse from the State Board of Accountancy or AICPA of why the testing was taking so long. They had a new system, that's fine, but implement a new system that doesn't have ridiculous grading windows because it screwed people up. So, that way, if you failed it, you have... Now I believe the turnaround's about 2 weeks for a test to get graded. So if you take it towards the end of the testing window, within a couple weeks you should know what your score is. That gives you a couple more weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to review the content of the test, work on issues that if you did fail, you should have a good feeling for what topics you failed on. Go hit those topics hard again and test early in the next window. That way, right after you test on that, you can get cracking on the next test, and you can take that test at the end of the same testing window. So I could have made a visual, but I kind of just threw this together. But if you understand what I'm saying, it works out really good. Lucky for me, I never did fail an exam, but I was always prepared in case I did fail one, because I did walk away from a couple really feeling bad about them. I walked away from Reg and FAR, both of them pretty confident I had failed. And that's the thing. You can get stuff wrong on these. You can, like, I walked away completely knowing I blew at least one simulation on each of them, and you can still pass. So moving on, that's kind of my general testing strategy that I can think of. So we're already 10 minutes in. So starting with your actual study strategy. I'm going to be using Becker just because that's what I subscribe to. I recommend Becker. I know other people that have used other ones and they've passed, but it's taken them like 7 test attempts to pass. And, take it from me, Becker is perfectly fine. Just use Becker. It's worth it. You don't need the Becker bundle I did it just because I didn't know. So I have the subscription for life now, which is always good if I do need to go refresh myself. A lot of the time it's tested topics that I need to refresh myself on in the real world. So it's just a good collaboration of information to have a lifetime subscription to. So if you want to go with the Becker bundle, don't buy the Becker flashcards. We will do those on our own. So when you're going to do a topic, say individual taxation part 2. Okay, so adjustments. It's a pretty, looks like it wasn't very heavily tested, but anyway, they've updated this since I took it too. I was tested on the 2017 tax code. When you start with a lecture, you want to annotate with the lecturer, just like on your screen, you got Peter Olinto or whoever. Follow along with the annotations, and as you work through the lecture, put stars next to important things. Whether it be a formula, a definition, whether it be like a steps in audit, you do this, 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 and this. There's a whole list of things that you'll want to make flashcards for. To put it into perspective for you, on BEC, I had a total of 86 flashcards. For Reg, I had about 200. For FAR, I had about 300. And for audit, I had, I think, around 120 of just handwritten flashcards. So after the lecture, you go through the lecture, you annotate everything. You want to hand write flashcards for everything you put a star next to. This is going to basically make sure all the important points that you need to know are on a flashcard. That's the goal here when you're working through everything for the first time. Just get every important point on a flashcard. You don't need to study the flashcards yet. Just get them on flashcards. I never did a skills practice. It was just a review of the lecture, basically. If you followed along with the lecture, the skills practice was just basically redundant to me. I didn't do it. So then you go on to the multiple choice. And as you're working through multiple choice, if there is, a common theme of questions you're getting wrong or something, make a flashcard for it. Handwritten flashcards are so helpful in studying for the CPA. It's something that's not in the study plan, but it will pass the test for you, I promise. So as you do multiple choice, add flashcards for questions you don't know. Repeat this for every module in order. So I worked through everything in order. I tried to do, if it was a big module, I would do 1 a day when I was a student still. If there were shorter modules, I would do 2 in 1 day. And by 1 day, I mean in the evening after work and after classes. Normally, I would just set aside 1 day to do homework. Okay, so repeat after every module. So complete all modules within 2 months, aim for 1 chapter a week. Now this is a good time frame for every test except FAR. FAR has so much content. I'd almost recommend you want to get like 1.5 to 2 chapters per week. When I was doing FAR, I was not working and I was not a student. I took the summer after graduation off. I worked 25 hours a week at a bank, and I would do 3 to 4 modules a day, doing this strategy with the flashcards, multiple choice, and the lecture. This worked really well. That's what I mean when I say it's hard to do this stuff when you have a full-time job. FAR is so much content to try and study when you're working full-time. I really don't recommend it. I recommend taking time off to do FAR. Everything else is doable with a 40-hour work week. FAR is pretty ugly if you try that. So, leave 2 to 3 weeks for cumulative study. So when you're doing cumulative study, this is once you've gone through all of the lectures and multiple choice once, and you've made flashcards for all the topics. So cumulative study twice a day. Go through all your flashcards. It's probably going to take half an hour to 45 minutes to get through them all. You will have a lot of them. But do this, I promise, if you do this, every single thing you wrote down on a flashcard will be memorized. When you are sitting in the testing environment, you will be able to visualize your handwriting on the flashcard, and that is huge. If you can just visualize the image of what you had written on a flashcard for something, you will remember during the test. So at this point, you want to start doing practice tests. This really helps with the application problems, where you just gotta keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you just know the process of how to do them all. I always started 2 chapters. You just start doing a progress test with 2 chapters. I always start with the 2 most heavily tested chapters according to the blueprints. After that, add 2 of the next most heavily tested topics. Keep adding 2 chapters until you've mastered all of them. Or I think my rule was like every 3 days or so. Or actually, here was my rule. Now I remember. As you're testing on the 2, so if you start with 2 chapters for the practice test, at the same time you want to do the simulations for those chapters. This is really going to help you knock out the applications of the topics. So say, let's see, auditing, I remember this pretty well. So with audit, I believe the most heavily tested topics were A3 and A4. Okay, we're just going to go with that anyway. So I would do practice tests every day for audit 2, 3, and 4. And at the same time, I would do the simulation. So in one day I would do Sim 1 and Sim 2. Next day I would do Sim 3 and Sim 1 of A4. And then the following day I would do Sim 2 and 3 of A4. And then once all 6 of those sims are done, doing 2 a day, I would add 2 more chapters. In this case, I believe I added chapters 1 and 2 to it. So, first day I did simulation 1 from chapter 1. I probably gapped it out, so I just did one day. The next day I did simulation 1 and 2. So I only did practice tests for 4 chapters for 2 days with this one. Then you add the last 2 chapters, A5 and A6. Again, when you're doing that, work through the simulations at the same days that you're doing the practice tests. So that looks like that's another 2-day one, where it would take you 2 days to get through the simulations. Once you've done that, just do full all-chapter practice tests every day and do flashcards every day. Once you hit your cumulative study, you are doing all the flashcards every day. You've got to memorize everything on those flashcards. That's why you were handwriting them, and that's why you put a star next to every single important thing you needed to know. If it's in bold, or if one of the instructors put a star next to it, you put a star next to it. So on the last week before you take your exam, you're all done with the lectures, you've hit a ton of practice tests, you've done all the simulations, and you've been hitting all 300 of your flashcards very hard. You want to take a mock exam early in the week and only do flashcards that day. Mock exams are freaking exhausting. When you finish one, you will be very tired and not want to study anymore. So what I would do is I would take a mock exam early in the day around 10 a.m., which is when I recommend you take the test on test day. And then that evening or that night, do flashcards. In between that, relax, meditate, get yourself mentally ready, go to a baseball game, do something to just relax yourself and get rid of this anxiety. So after that, continue practice tests every day. There is not a mock exam, flashcards too. So if you're not doing a mock exam that day, you're doing 100 questions worth of practice tests. Now, when I had Becker, they didn't have simulations in the practice tests. So if you want to throw a simulation or 2 in every time, go ahead. I wasn't doing sims. I was only doing sims when I actually did the chapter simulations and then in the mock exams. And that worked out fine for me. If you want to add sims, it's only going to benefit you. So when you're 3 days out, take the second mock exam, only flashcards that day, same thing. See where you're at. Typically, and I will confirm this, the Becker mock exams are they are harder than the actual exam. And you cannot, that exam is scored so weird and there's so many weird variations they do. Don't take the percentage that you get in Becker. That is not your score. Becker does not score your exam the way the graders score it. They give you a flat percent. The scorers do not give you a flat percent. There's different weighting on different questions. And in the exam, you have no way of knowing how that question is weighted or if it's a pre-tested question. So 2 days out, practice test on still difficult topics. This is where you might do a practice test on only certain chapters that you're still having a little bit of trouble on. And then if, just 2 days out, just practice tests on difficult topics and hit the flashcards again. 1 day out, do the final mock exam and hit flashcards up that night. Get a decent night of sleep. Take Z-Quil if you can. Just take it early in the evening if you're going to take it. If you are going to use a sleep aid, since you're so nervous, I would take the sleep aid at like 8 or 9 o'clock so you can hit the bed around 10 o'clock at night. Don't take it and then like oversleep or something, or you don't want to screw your routine up too much. So on the day of exam, I recommend taking the actual exam at around 10 a.m. Arrive very early at Prometric. I would normally arrive about 45 minutes early. I would sit in my car and review my flashcards before going into Prometric. Bring your flashcards with. Yes, people are going to look at you weird as they walk in and out of the building, but just sit in your car with the car turned off, going over flashcards. I went through my flashcards like 2 times before I went in. Now, you got to look at the clock too. 20 minutes before going in, if you are a caffeine addict like me, this is when you take your no-dose, your Jet Alert, whatever it is. Typically, it's a pill that's 200 milligrams of caffeine. That's when you want to take it. That way, you're on a caffeine high for the entire test. If caffeine helps you this way, that's when you want to take your dose, and you want it to be a spike. You want to be able to think very quickly when you're on the caffeine high. And typically 200 milligrams, you'll crash right around 3.5, 4 hours out. So towards the end of the exam, you might start to crash on caffeine. I'm so addicted to caffeine and drink it so much that it doesn't even bother me. I can function perfectly for the rest of the day once I get my caffeine. So that was just kind of a joke almost that I threw in there. Just, that's what I did. And I almost forgot the most important point on here. I'm going to type it in a bigger font. Take Saturdays off. You gotta have an off day. The whole time you're studying, you have one off day. And that is a day to have fun, relax. I do not advise you to drink. Do not drink when you're studying for the exam, except after you take an exam. Then you can take a week off while you're waiting for your score. Go drink, go have fun. But if you get really, really drunk on a night, which senior spring, I know that's what you're going to want to do, just don't do it. It's not worth it. If you get hammered one night, you're going to be completely screwed the next day for studying. And how much it affected your sleep, you could even screw up the day after that. 2 days of studying isn't worth getting drunk. Just wait till after you take an exam. So given that, I believe that's the end of my little list here on tips on how to take the exam. If enough people want this little Word document I made that kind of just gives a step-by-step of my study strategy, I'd be happy to put it on a public Google Drive or something. But that is how I took my exams. That was my study strategy. That's the study strategy I used for pretty much every exam. I did refine it a little bit as I went, but that is basically the final version of my exam. For the first couple exams, I did the flashcards all at the end. So I would go through all the chapters and modules once I finished every single lecture in the test. And that just got to be a lot of doing note cards all at once, because making note cards is boring as shit. So you really want to space out the making of the flashcards. So that's why I recommend make your flashcards after every lecture. Even though you're not going to use them until the cumulative studying, you want to have them all made, and it worked out so well. I did that for FAR and audit, and it worked so much better than with reg. With reg, I did it all at the end, and I was miserable the 2 days that I was making flashcards. It was so boring. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. I don't normally get a lot of comments, so I try to reply to most of my comments on my videos. If I do get a lot on this, I may not reply right away. But you can catch me on the candidates forum. I'm normally on there giving people advice. However, I get bored saying the same thing over and over because a lot of people do ask the same questions over and over. So anyway, I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. I could talk about the CPA exam for hours. So I hope this video was helpful. Please consider my CPA order. I think that's a really good order to take the exams in. And I feel like a lot of people disagree with me, and I think my results speak for themselves. I did very good on the CPA, and I knocked everything out on the first try with this study strategy. And in 2 months, I am officially going to be a licensed CPA, which I'm super excited about, hoping to get a big raise and tackle this mountain of student loan debt I have, because private colleges are not worth the money. Let me tell you that right now. Do not go to a private college. It is a waste of money. So I will leave you with that. Get your CPA, but go to a cheap college to get the 150 credits. This is CDog2233, and thanks for watching.